Luke chapter 4. We'll be looking at verse 31 through 37 to start out this morning. We'll be looking at a few different things, a couple different passages. So we'll go ahead and read verses 31 through 37, and then we'll go ahead and pray as we begin this morning. It says, of course, speaking of Jesus, and came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and taught them on the Sabbath days. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power. And in the synagogue there was a man which had a spirit of an unclean devil, and cried out with a loud voice, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the devil had thrown him in the midst, he came out of him, and hurt him not. And they were all amazed, and spake among themselves, saying, What a word is this? For with authority and power he commandeth the unclean spirits, and they come out. And the fame of him went out into every place of the country round about. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll get started this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day that you've given to us. I pray that you would be with us today. Please just give us a good time in your house. Lord, I pray that you would give me the words you would have me to say, and that we would just learn from the lessons that we have and from the words that you have given to us regarding your Son. Lord, I thank you, and I pray that you will bless our time in your house today. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, so first off, we're going to be looking our ninth lesson in regards to the life of Christ at the beginning of Christ's healing ministry. So last week, we looked also in Luke chapter 4, the verses 14 through 30, Christ's rejection at Nazareth. And so this really is more in chronological order here. It comes directly after this. He went down to Capernaum. And so we see here then the unclean spirit being cast out, that he had already performed his miracle at the well of Cana, or at the wedding of Cana, and that now he is here in Capernaum, a city of Galilee. And just like in the city of Nazareth, of course, it said in verse 16, he came to Nazareth and he went, as his custom was, into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And so in the same way, it says in verse 31, he came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and taught them on the Sabbath days, and they were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power. So he comes to Capernaum from Nazareth, and it says that he came down, that Capernaum is at a lower point of sea level. Nazareth is in the hill country, and Capernaum is far below sea level there, but still in the region of Galilee. So he comes down from the hill country of Nazareth and again teaches in the synagogue. And it says in verse 32, and they were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power. And we saw last week how that it said in verse 14, and Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit into Galilee. And we've seen the word power kind of over and over again, especially here in the book of Luke, whenever it regards to Christ, that he is constantly in the power and in the Spirit of his Father, that is his focus, that he follows directly after the Spirit's leading in everything that he does. So we see that here in his teaching in Capernaum that he is still full of the Spirit, and that it is shown through his teaching. It says, for his word was with power. And of course, this word power is also in regards to authority. But of course, we know that the authority of preaching comes from the Spirit. And so the people were astonished at his words. And if we look in the book of Mark, Mark chapter 1, we see kind of the same order as we'll look at a few different passages today. But Mark and Luke give us kind of the same timeline here. It says in verse 21 of Mark 1, and they went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority and not as the scribes. So we get that little tidbit of extra information from the book of Mark, that not only did he teach as one having authority, but that this was something that the people were not used to, because it was in a different manner than the scribes, that the scribes did not teach with the same authority that Christ did here in the synagogue. And so we see that as he came down to Capernaum, that he was full of the Spirit, and that this was evident through the words that he taught. And so it says in verse 33, and in the synagogue, Luke 4, verse 33, in the synagogue there was a man which had a spirit of an unclean devil, and cried out with a loud voice. Now, we'll notice a lot in the New Testament, and especially in the Gospels, where men are described as having, or people are described as having an unclean spirit, or the spirit of an unclean devil. And it really seems like this is something that was a problem in this time. And of course, we don't see that so much throughout the ministry of Paul and later on in the New Testament, or anything that we hear so much of today. Now, possibly that's because it was emphasized here, because the Israelites, the Hebrews, should not have had people with unclean spirits, because they were people of God. I'm not sure, but we see here a man present in the synagogue, and that really struck me, that there really are two different explanations, or possible explanations for this, that it was either that this unclean spirit filling this man was not evident on the outside. And there are others that we'll study, actually. There's, of course, the maniac of Gadara, who had a devil. He was vexed with the devil, and it was evident from his person. He lived in the tombs. He wore no clothes. He cut himself. That all of these things showed the affliction that he had. But that this man was actually in the synagogue with this unclean spirit shows that either it was not evident on his person, on the outside, that he had this affliction, or it reflects the apostasy of this region. And that's also possible as well. Of course, a few weeks ago we looked at the prophecy that in the region in the shadow of darkness, that the region of Galilee saw a great light. And that this part of Israel was steeped in apostasy and practices that were not part of the worship of God, of the true God. And so that's possible as well, that that just anybody was there, and that this is also reflected in the fact that the scribes did not teach with power. And so here in the synagogue, there were many that were simply there as an outward show, but had inward darkness. And so that's possible as well. But just shows the wickedness that Christ stood up against. A man with this devil, this unclean spirit, was there in the synagogue where Christ was teaching. And it says, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God." And so the Spirit cries out, and it's not always the case, but several times we'll see that where there is one unclean spirit, there are many. And so here also it says, "Let us alone," the plural there. "What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth?" And the account is the same in Mark 1, that the devil says these exact words, showing that there were many, or there were more than one spirit that dwelt in this man. And so we see Christ's altercation here with the unclean spirit. So this spirit, of course, was stirred up by the power of Christ's teaching. Again, a reflection on the lack of authority that the scribes taught with, that somebody with an unclean devil living inside of them could be there present in the synagogue and not cry out. But that there was a difference here. This was Christ standing up preaching with this authority, and not as the scribes, and it prompted this unclean spirit to cry out within this man. And I think that it's interesting because it says, "Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth?" And so these words that the unclean spirit is speaking, we don't know exactly how this came about. I think probably that it was just the man that said these words with at the prompting of that unclean spirit. It's now with modern Hollywood, and there's a lot of wickedness, of course, out there, but the idea of demonic possession has been very much dramatized in modern society. While the devil does have power, he only has the power given unto him by God. And the same is with the dwelling of an unclean spirit. And so I think that with the over-dramatization of these things, that we can't take that and discredit the power that Satan has and the wickedness that he influences in this world. But I think that it was simply this man crying out, because even the words are something that anybody could have said. And that they could have been applied to the entire synagogue. Whenever he says, "Let us alone, what have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth?" And of course, we know that Nazareth, Nathanael said, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" And so really it was a discredit to the authority of Christ. It was a discredit to his teaching. But yet the Spirit recognized who Christ was. And so what have we to do with thee really reflects the great gulf between the things of Christ and the things of Satan, that there is nothing in common. And that because this man was there in the synagogue just shows how little the actual word of God was being preached here, because he was there in the synagogue. And really, we have to take that and apply it to our ministries nowadays, that if there is nothing going on in a church, if there is no growth, if things are stagnant, then that really shows more in regards to the church than a church that is small but is really on fire for God, and that their people are out ministering and being participants in the ministries and going out and desiring to reach others. You know, we can have a small church but still be on fire for God. And so we shouldn't take the numbers that we see and apply it to that God is not working, because so much better that than to have a large church but nothing is being done. And I think that there were probably many people in the synagogue, and yet the Spirit of God was not there until Christ himself came and began to preach with power and authority. And so the devils and Satan understand and did, in this case, the authority and power of God as well as the person of Christ. And yet he is crying out here in an attempt to battle the words that Christ is speaking here. And so Christ's authority over this unclean spirit is manifested. It says in verse 35, "And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the devil had thrown him in the midst, he came out of him and hurt him not. And they were all amazed, and spake among themselves, saying, What a word is this? For with authority and power he commandeth the unclean spirits, and they come out." And I just have to imagine in my mind's eye just the shock that this would have created for probably somebody who did not show any outward signs of demonic possession and is simply crying out here in the synagogue against the words of Christ as a man. And then Christ turns to him, singles him out, rebukes the unclean spirit, and it says that it threw him in the midst. And so at that point, it was very clear of what afflicted this man that caused him to cry out. His possession with this unclean spirit was very clear. And it says that he came out of him and hurt him not, which also, of course, would have been at the command of Christ, because we know from other accounts that the unclean spirits were able to physically harm those that they possessed. And so Christ commands this unclean spirit, and he is cast out. And it says, "And the fame of him went out into every place of the country round about." And so the spirit of the unclean devil cast out, and some of these things will actually apply then to some of the other healings that Christ does. And so we come now to verse 38, the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. And we actually find a little bit more information in Mark chapter 1. So I'll go ahead and have you turn there. Mark chapter 1. And looking in verse 29, it says, "And forthwith," and that word forthwith means immediately, "when they were come out of the synagogue." So this is the same account. Christ is in the synagogue and had just cast out this unclean spirit. And it says, "And forthwith," or immediately, "when they were come out of the synagogue, they entered into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John." Now, to get a little bit of context here, if we look in the book of Luke, the account of the calling of Peter and Andrew, James and John, and their draught of fishes that they take up out of the Sea of Galilee actually occurs after these things. But chronologically, I believe that it actually occurred first. Because here in the book of Mark, right after the temptation of Christ, we see the calling of Peter, James, and John. And though it doesn't talk about the draught of fishes and that miracle that occurred, we know that it was the same account. And so after these things, they came into Capernaum, and then forthwith, after the casting out of the unclean spirit, they come into the synagogue. and enter into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. And so that relationship is built because they are now followers of Christ. And it says in verse 30, but Simon's wife's mother lay sick of a fever, and anon they tell him of her. And so I think that this is what really shows us that this is the chronological order that he had this time of calling Peter, Andrew, James, and John first, because I'm sure that if this were something that had happened first, that Christ would have done everything he could to heal this relative of one of his disciples. But it shows that Peter and Andrew were not in the actual vicinity at this time. It almost reads that they were gone, that they were called of Christ at the Sea of Galilee, that they went into Capernaum, that all of these things were taking place, and that Simon's wife's mother became sick while they were gone. And so it was unknown that she was ill. And so it says, and anon they tell him of her. And anon, that's also a word that means immediately. So almost as if she was caught with this fever while they were fishing, and then all of these other things took place. And so they come into the house. This is the first time that Simon is aware of the fact that his mother-in-law is sick, and immediately they tell him of her. And so Peter's mother-in-law is taken with a great fever. And in Luke, we actually see the word great in regards to this fever, which kind of gives us the idea that Luke, as a physician, is more aware of the physical medical terms of that time, that he knew kind of exactly what was going on. But many different things could be considered fevers at this time. They didn't have the medical knowledge that we have today. And so it could have been that she was out at the well or outside and contracted sunstroke. Water was a commodity, more of a commodity than it is at this today, and especially in more of a desert region. And so, heat stroke and dehydration was more common. But suffice to say that she was sick and that this was a very serious illness that she had. And so we see that Christ comes into the house, and that immediately he sees this serious medical condition, that he is made aware of these things, and that he comes, and it says, and he took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she ministered unto them. And so I think that this is really a tribute then to the believers that brought Christ to her, because all of these words here, forthwith, anon, they mean immediately. In other words, these people that saw the plight of Peter's mother-in-law knew exactly where to go to be able to get healing for her. That they knew that Christ was the one that would be able to make her whole again. And so I think that this is a testimony then to Christ's love, not only for the people of Israel here, but also for those that he is close to. And we'll see that again whenever we look at the raising of Lazarus, but that he took it upon himself to go and to take this time to make sure that this woman who is that is a very close relative of Peter's, of one of his followers, is whole or is made well again. And we'll look at this a little bit further with the next miracle that we see, or the next healing that we look at. But Christ at this time had not really he had not really established healing as a part of his ministry. He had cast out this demon from this man, but that wasn't really so much of a physical healing as a spiritual healing. He had not really begun to take healing as an active part of his ministry. And so we see that the reason for this miracle is that he cared for her. That he cared for the situation and for these people that were here, sorrowful at this situation. And so just as this request was immediately brought to Christ by these people, this family, so the effect of his power was immediately evident in that he came, took her by the hand, lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her. And so while for us, answers to prayers are not always immediate, the power of God is an immediate, has immediate effect. And that can have form in different things. You know, even though God may not answer a prayer immediately, we know that he has power to give immediate peace. That if there's a situation that we're struggling with that we don't have an immediate answer to, he can give us immediate comfort. And that shows that his power is everywhere and that it is right there exactly when we need it. And so it says the fever left her and she ministered unto them. And so immediately after being made whole, this mother-in-law of Peter shows her own spiritual, her own spirituality and her work ethic, and shows what a godly woman she was by taking this time and ministering unto them. That just as Christ had served her, she is now serving others. And so in verse 32 it says, "And at even, when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased, and them that were possessed with devils. And all the city was gathered together at the door, and he healed many that were sick of divers diseases, and cast out many devils, and suffered not the devils to speak, because they knew him. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place, and there prayed. And Simon and they that were with him followed after him. And when they had found him, they said unto him, All men seek for thee. And he said unto them, Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also. For therefore am I come. And he preached in their synagogues throughout all Galilee, and cast out devils." And so we see that, of course, his fame had spread abroad because of the healing of this man that was possessed with the devil, as well as the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. But then we see that they begin to press him. All the city was gathered together at the door, and of course he took this time and healed many. But that was not the purpose of Christ's ministry. And we see that here in verse 38, that he says, Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also, for therefore came I forth. And he preached in their synagogues throughout all Galilee, and cast out devils. So we see that Christ's purpose here, that he makes this determination that he is going to make his focus preaching. That he's going to make his focus the purifying of the inner man rather than the outward man. That the inward heart is more important than the outward physical body. And so he makes this determination. Of course, he is there willing to heal when necessary. But as the people begin to press him, he needs a spiritual strength. And so he goes out into this solitary place and prays. And as the people begin to continue to follow him, he makes this decision, this determination to preach. And that's going to be important as we look going further in verses 40 through 45. And we'll see a familiar passage here, but it says, And there came a leper to him, beseeching him, and kneeling down to him, and saying unto him, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand, and touched him, and saith unto him, I will, be thou clean. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. And he straightly charged him, and forthwith sent him away, and saith unto him, See thou say nothing to any man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, and offer for thy cleansing those things which Moses commanded for a testimony unto them. But he went out and began to publish it much, and to blaze abroad the matter, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city, but was without in desert places, and they came to him from every quarter. Now, if we look, first of all, just to get some context here, of course, Christ had just made this determination that he was going to focus on preaching, on the inward condition of man, rather than on the outward healing. And so very soon after this, he comes here to Galilee. He's going throughout the synagogues of Galilee, and there comes a leper to him, beseeching him and kneeling and saying, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And so when we look at this, what is the initial idea that we get from this leper and his character? Just from this verse where he says, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. What is the idea that we have of his condition and of his spirit coming to Christ? Any ideas, Austin?
He's very humble. He knows that Christ can heal him, and he's requesting that he will.
Right, so his initial spirit coming to Christ looks like a spirit of humility. And also, another thing along with this, Mrs. Golden, did you have another idea?
No, I was just kind of thinking what Austin was, that he's showing that it's in Christ's power to choose
Right.
whether he's going to.
Exactly, and so that's the other aspect of that, both of them saying what they did of not only the humility, but also faith in Christ's power, that he has that aspect of faith as well. If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And in that spirit of humility, he's putting the request into the hands of Christ, that he recognizes that Christ is out here preaching, but he has this condition which is very serious, and that if Christ so chooses, that he has the ability to do this. And so Christ, it says, moved with compassion, put forth his hands and touched him, and saith unto him, I will, be thou clean. So we see the request for cleansing. It was made first humbly, and as a result, he received Christ's compassion. And of course, all it took was a touch. So the outward cleansing came at a simple touch from Christ, which of course would have been very unusual for somebody to reach out and touch a leper, given the requirements that the law had in regards to one with leprosy. And so we see that the faith of the man is there, that as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. But now we see that there's a different feel or a different tone to the verses after this. It says, And he straightly charged him, and forthwith sent him away. Now, in the original languages that this was written in, the idea of straightly charged him and sent him away comes with the idea of a rebuke being added to it, that the wording of this implies that for some reason Jesus had cause to be irritated or angry with this man who he had just healed, which seems to contradict itself because the man had faith and humility coming to Christ. But whenever it says he straightly charged him and forthwith sent him away, there is that idea of rebuke there. And he says unto him, See that thou say nothing to any man, but go thy way and show thyself to the priests, and offer for thy cleansing those things which Moses commanded for a testimony unto them. And so he's commanding him, he's giving him a very specific instruction here. So he says, go thy way, saying nothing to any man, and show thyself unto the priest. And this was a commandment required by the law of Moses, that if any had leprosy and thought themselves to be clean, that they would go into the priest, that the priest would then make the determination if he were clean or not, that he would offer not only a burnt offering, but a sin offering as well, and that he would then have a time of staying away, that there would be a time of him being set apart to determine that this cleansing had indeed taken place. And so Christ, even though he himself obviously knew that he was cleansed completely of his leprosy, is giving this charge. And of course we know that Christ did not come to condemn the law, but to fulfill it. And so he's requiring that these conditions be met. But I think that there was also something within this man, something within the leper that Christ recognized, that he saw within his heart, that while the outward cleansing was complete, the inward cleansing was not. And that this is the reason, or a main reason, why he required that this leper who was just cleansed continue and go to the priest to continue the rituals that were necessary according to the law. And so it says in verse 45, but he went out and began to publish it much and to blaze abroad the matter. And this is not just the, how nice is that? This man is so excited that he was just cleansed by Jesus, that he's going out and being a witness. That's not what's going on here. What this man is doing is deliberately disobeying the command that Christ had given to him to go and to offer those things up for his cleansing. Not only is he not going to the priest because, I'm clean, it's not a big deal if I go to the priest or not, but he is deliberately disregarding the offering that he is required to make, not only a burnt offering, but a sin offering as well. And it says, those things, an offer for thy cleansing. In other words, the cleansing was not complete. Yes, the outward of this man was cleansed, but the inward, that cleansing was not completed. And I believe that this was a test. That if that man were truly thankful, if that man were truly desirous of being completely cleansed, not only on the outside, but on the inside as well, that he would go and fulfill these things that Christ commanded him to. And we know that there are other instances where Christ gives a test to individuals, that he tells them, of course there's the rich young ruler where he's asking Christ how he can inherit eternal life. And Christ tells him, sell all that thou hast and give to the poor. Now, was that going to give that man eternal life? No, but it was a test to see where his heart lay. And in this instance, I believe that this is the same scenario, that he commands these things to this man, and yet he completely disregards it and blazes about the matter, and so much that Christ could no more openly enter into the city, but was without in desert places, and they came to him from every quarter. Now let's take a moment to think about this. What had Christ just determined? That he was going to focus on preaching, that the inward heart of man was his focus. It says, let us go into the next towns that I may preach there also, for therefore came I forth. Christ had just made this decision to emphasize preaching more than healing because he understood that his ministry was primarily for the saving of the soul. This is what Christ had come for. Not to be this Messiah that came and took away all of man's ailments and set up his kingdom here on earth, but to save the heart of man. So what is going on here then? He had just made this determination, in a moment of compassion, because of this man's situation, he decides to cleanse this man. He reaches out his hand, he offers this cleansing to the leper, and this leper immediately goes out and begins to publish it against the commands of Christ and blaze abroad the matter insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city. What is the significance of this? That Christ's preaching cannot be given in the city because of what this man has done. That he could no more openly enter into the city, but was without in desert places. Why? Because he published this abroad. Not that Christ was a preacher of the gospel or that he was the Messiah, but that he published about that he had healed him. This was not the witness that that Christ needed him to be. And that is an important thing to keep in mind, that we all have a testimony. We all have a witness. Now, we can have different types of testimonies, and we can be a witness of different things. We can be a witness of, and just to take things of the day-to-day, we can be a witness of how good a certain recipe is. We can be a witness of that this person does a really good job cutting hair. We can be a witness that this place is a really good restaurant to eat at. We can be witnesses of many things, but when it comes to the gospel, we should be a witness of what it's done for us internally, of the way that it has cleansed us from the inside. Not that we take these things selfishly and, I got saved and immediately my finances started getting better. Immediately I started feeling better physically. Immediately I started having a better relationship with my family. And we were able to go out and do a lot of things that we haven't been able to do before. I'm more financially secure. No, that's not what we're supposed to be a witness of. All of those things are an effect of us having and receiving the blessings of God, but it's not what we should be a witness of. We should be a witness of the miracle that he's done to the inner man. And because this man neglected these things, I believe that he did not truly receive salvation, that he received the outward cleansing, he received the benefit of Christ, but he did not receive the true inward cleansing that he needed. And so as a result, because of this man's disobedience, Christ could not publish his message. He could not preach in the way that he intended to, because this man had, in a very real sense, discouraged the ministry of Christ. While maybe he thought that he was encouraging people to go and be healed, that's not what Christ's ministry was for. It was for the healing of the inner man. And this leper, after receiving the blessing of God, essentially took Christ's true purpose and twisted it. And that is the power that our testimony has. We can either be a testimony for the right things, or we can be a completely twisted witness, and in that way be rather than somebody who is just stagnant, we are somebody who is actually detrimental to the work of God. And so this leper here, not just somebody who received the healing of Christ and testified of it, but somebody who rather was actually a hindrance to the message that Christ had to offer. So as we look at the healing ministry of Christ, I want us to keep that in mind. That while he did have that power and while he did heal many, his purpose was to go and preach. And it says, of course, that he preached in their synagogues throughout all Galilee and cast out devils. And I think that rather than healing a leper, he would rather have cast out a devil that was ailing the inner man. And so I think that it's just really a key for us to make sure that we are being that right type of witness, because the wrong type will hinder the ministry that God has for us to do. And not just for us, but for others to do as well. We can hinder the work that God is doing in our church, in the witness that we have for our family members, for anybody that we interact with. If we take the blessings of God and do not also allow that to be something that causes our inward man to draw closer to Him as well. Because every blessing that God gives us is also an opportunity for our relationship with Him to increase as well. So we'll go ahead and continue with this idea of the healing ministry of Christ next week. And then we'll be, after that, looking at the Sermon on the Mount. So let's go ahead and pray and prepare for the morning service.